He's Ben Rhodes. He is co-host of Pod Save the World. If you want to hear from his co-host, Tommy Vitor, he was on last week's South Beach Sessions. I want, Ben, thank you for joining us, for you to give me some insight as to what it is that's happening in Russia over the weekend where it would appear we had a 24-hour coup here. Can you explain to me what happened?
Sure. There's this guy, Yevgeny Prigozhin, right, who runs a private military mercenary force, essentially, called the Wagner Group. And Vladimir Putin has often used different kind of fiefdoms, different warlords to serve his interests. And over the course of the last several years, the Wagner Group has become more and more powerful. They kind of do a lot of Putin's dirty work for him. They run his disinformation campaigns. They've been part of his wars in places like Syria. And they've, since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine last year, they've really been on the front lines, grinding it out in some of the toughest fighting. And their estimates that they had 25,000 fighters, some of whom were hardened mercenaries, some of whom were convicts pulled out of prisons and thrown at the front lines. And for the last several months, Prigozhin, who's been a Putin ally in the past, has been complaining louder and louder and louder that he wasn't getting the support he needed, that he was not being given ammunition by the Russian Ministry of Defense, that the generals who are in the normal chain of command were essentially leaving his men hung out to dry, treating them as cannon fodder. And this finally reached a boiling point a few days ago when he went on Telegram and Russian social media and announced that he was launching a military rebellion and that he was going to march for justice. He was going to march on Moscow. And he took over a very large city in Russia, Rostov, which is 1 million people. It's also the logistics hub for the war in Ukraine. And he marched to within about 150 miles of Moscow. So this was a big piece of business. Then mysteriously, a deal was announced in which he would disappear to Belarus, a neighboring country, in exchange for essentially being given amnesty and his men being given amnesty. And so nobody quite knows what happens next, but we know we just watched the biggest challenge to Vladimir Putin in over 20 years. We know that we just saw kind of a huge embarrassment to the Russian military, that the Wagner guys were able to take over the city and make it near Moscow. And so there's a lot of open questions about what happens next in Russia and what happens next in Ukraine.
I have a number of questions for you. I just think that if you, at any point in my lifetime, do something like this to Putin, you don't get your freedom 24 hours later. You don't get immunity. You don't. You get dead. You get dead is what ends up happening. So please explain to me what kind of showing of weakness this is, because the war has been a bit of a disaster for Putin.
Here's why it's some weakness for Putin. First of all, because this guy, right, when he was in this March for Justice, Putin went on television and he said this guy's a traitor. He needs to be detained. He needs to be thrown in prison. And the whole Russian nation saw that, right? That's on every channel. And for this guy to get a deal a few hours later in which, you know, he's not in prison, in which he's allowed to go to another country, that's not what Putin told people was going to happen, right? And so in addition to just the embarrassment of Russians kind of fighting against each other, the Wagner guys were shooting down Russian helicopters. In addition to that embarrassment, Putin didn't kind of do what he said when he went on television. Now, like you said, people who've crossed Putin have had a history of being poisoned, of quote unquote falling off of balconies. So we will see if that catches up to Prigozhin, if he's allowed to live in exile.
But that's a thing. That's a thing,
yeah.
Right? Falling out of hospital windows is a thing in Russia whenever you counter Putin, or poison is a thing. For 24 hours, what do you imagine? As someone who knows strategy and is sophisticated,
the amount of window deaths does, to me, seem a little suspicious because it's pretty high. I mean, higher than usual.
Yes, a lot of people have fallen off of balconies. This is a thing that has happened in Russia. Powerful oligarchs, people with a lot of money. Now, what Prigozhin has that's different is he has an army, right? He's got 25,000 guys that report to him. The other thing that was embarrassing to Putin is the people in Rostov, the city that Wagner took over, they were cheering for Prigozhin, and those images went around the world too. But I have to think that Prigozhin is probably going to be trying to go pretty deep into hiding here as he plans his next move. He's the kind of guy who would have once made people fall off of balconies, right? He's the kind of guy whose men might have once poisoned people. So he knows exactly what Putin is capable of doing. And the question is whether he can avoid that fate.
Ben, why does he have to go into hiding if he's gotten the go-ahead from Putin that everything's going to be okay? It seems inconsistent. Either he's going to get thrown off the balcony or he got a new hot dog stand that he can go run. But either way, he should know his fate. Is there a chance that Putin changes his mind? Is that the issue?
There's a chance, right? There's a chance here. I mean, Wagner's beef, right? Prigozhin said his main beef was less with Putin than with the Russian military and these guys that he's been fighting with. There's a chance that Prigozhin got a check cut. He's got some money wired to him somewhere. We haven't seen him. So the only reason to say he might be going to hiding is after being very visible on Russian social media in the height of this rebellion, he's not been seen or heard from since. By the way, neither is Putin, who has plenty of places that he can go to duck and cover if things look like they're getting a little hot like they were in Moscow. So I think right now Prigozhin is a guy with an army who's calculating his next move. And I think the other thing Putin worries about is if you take those 25,000 guys off the battlefield in Ukraine, well, then that makes Russia weaker too. And he wants to figure out a way to keep those guys in the fight. So right now, like everybody's calculating their next move. And I'm not sure, honestly, that anybody knows exactly what happens next. Putin, Prigozhin, or certainly those of us watching this from the outside.
Can you tell me any more about this army of 25,000 men? You just said convicts and whatnot, but these have to be some of the most rugged people in the universe.
These are tough guys. So Wagner, like they fought in Syria on behalf of Putin. They fought in Libya. They've been in parts of Africa where they control, diamond mines and other natural resources. So some of these guys, the core guys, these are like their version of special forces, right? These are their version of I don't want to say SEALs because they're not that capable, but these are highly trained guys. That's some of the Wagner contingent that's been fighting in Ukraine. Now, how they got to 25,000 is that they were taking hardened criminals and throwing them at the front lines. And so there's the guys who've been treated like cannon fodder in the Wagner forces, who've been in the toughest fighting, kind of grinded out block by block fighting in Ukraine. And then you've got some highly trained guys that kind of make up the inner circle around Prigozhin. And I'm sure that Russia, again, doesn't want to lose those guys in the fight, but nor do they want those guys marching on Moscow either. And so there's maybe all kinds of negotiation happening behind the scenes right now.
How many of those 25,000 people know what they're actually fighting for? I was just thinking that they've got it, Ben. How does that work? They're criminals, they're hardened, they've been all over. Do they actually know who they're reporting to and what they're fighting for?
So there's two pieces, right? Who they're reporting to is interesting because they're reporting to Prigozhin, right? So it's as if there's a Secretary of Defense and a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the U.S. military. It's as if that's one military and then there's a whole separate one. They do not report to up the chain of command to the Russian Minister of Defense. This is kind of Prigozhin's private army in the past on behalf of Putin. But in Ukraine, one of the interesting things about Prigozhin is that over the course of the last few months, he was saying the generals are incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. This is not working out in Ukraine because essentially Putin's being poorly served by the normal military. But when he did launch this rebellion, he kind of took a shot at Putin and said, nobody knows what the hell is going on in Ukraine. Nobody knows why we're here. And he kind of said the quiet part out loud. We've heard a lot about this really low Russian morale because all these troops that have been sent to Ukraine have no idea what they're doing there and what the end goal is here. And I think Prigozhin kind of lifted the veil on that one too. And I think he was speaking for one of the reasons why he was probably getting cheered on the streets of the Russian city of Rostov is a lot of Russians, it's hard for us to know what they think because it's such a closed country, but a lot of Russians seem to not really know what the hell is going on and why they're in Ukraine too. So I think he's exposed some of the morale issues in the Russian military that's already suffered over 200,000 casualties, killed and wounded. And it's probably speaking for a lot of people who are like, hey, nobody knows what the plan is here and what the end goal is here.
You were with Obama when America shot bin Laden. So before we get to that, I just want to know, when this news spreads in your circle of friends and you hear what's happening in Russia with a coup attempt, what starts circulating?
Well, what starts, because I'm friends too with some of the guys who are still in the Biden administration. What starts circulating is, first of all, astonishment. None of us have seen anything like this. Putin's been the most powerful guy in Russia in 23 years. No one has ever challenged him as directly as this guy did. And then I think people start wondering, like, what's the end game here? Does Prigozhin really think he can take over Moscow? Whose interest might be served by this? Everybody in Russia is kind of corrupt on the take. Is this a guy just trying to get a bigger piece of the pie in terms of money and power and influence? Or is this a guy who's really going at the king here? Who's really going at the Kremlin? And it seems like he pulled back. He wasn't really going at the king here. He was trying to make a point. He was probably trying to get a deal. He may have wanted to get out of the meat grinder of the Ukraine war too, right? But I think honestly, like people have been seeing this for a while. They've been seeing Prigozhin popping off. They've been seeing him making threats. In my circle, we've been sharing that information back and forth. With the Russians, by the way, you're always wondering, is this some kind of information operation? Are they trying to pull one over on us? But once we saw Putin coming out and condemning this and calling it a mutiny, then you know, okay, this thing is real. And so clearly this is a real thing that happened. This is a real military rebellion. Shots were fired. You had tanks in the streets of Moscow, something we haven't seen in a very long time. But now I think everybody's trying to figure out, where does this go next? What does Putin say next? Where does Prigozhin pop up next? Does Putin fire his generals? Who might be the next person? I'll tell you, one of the things that people are circulating in my circles is there another person who might make a run at Putin? Now that there's been this crack in the regime, does somebody else try to?
Does anyone else have an army?
25,000.
Does anyone else have an army of 25,000 mercenaries and criminals?
No, the generals. If you ask me, how might Putin ever go? It's probably not going to be a bunch of college students in Moscow. It's going to be a bunch of stern-faced generals who might, show up on TV one day and said, Vladimir has had an accident, right? And so the military itself could fracture. There is another guy, by the way, who has a bunch of troops, and he's a Chechen warlord named Ramzan Kadyrov, who's an even bigger lunatic than Prigozhin. And keep in mind, these are bad guys. These are guys that, have committed atrocities, right? These are sanctioned by the United States. But between the military and some of these warlords, Putin has kind of kept it this way, right? He didn't want anybody to get powerful enough to challenge him, so he creates these different kind of corrupt fiefdoms. Well, now what happened is one guy got powerful enough to challenge him, and the question is, does somebody else do that?
It sounds like there's going to be a merger.
I understated it. You've got chaos in this war scenario, correct? This couldn't, so far for Putin, the Ukraine war couldn't have gone a lot worse without losing it already, correct?
Pretty much. I mean, they still control a chunk of Ukraine, but he thought that there were going to be tanks, Russian tanks in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, in the early days of this war. Here we are 16 months later, there are Russian tanks in the streets of Moscow to try to keep an invading army of Russians out, right? So that's not going well if you're Putin.
Last thing before I let you go, just because I'm curious, the most interesting thing that you remember from being in the room when bin Laden was shot was?
The most interesting thing is that Bill McRaven, who ran the operation for the SEALs and the Special Forces, he was kind of narrating the operation, right? And so he's giving a play-by-play, literally. It's like a radio announcer. And when the first helicopters were going into the bin Laden compound, one of them clipped the wall. And for a split second, we thought the worst thing was happening, that a helicopter was crashing. We're going to lose some SEALs, lose some Americans. But he was totally calm, totally unflappable. He said, don't worry. These guys have been trained for this. They know how to land this. They know how to get this done. And it was only a few minutes after that he announces Geronimo ID. Geronimo was the code name for bin Laden. And then within, I'd say a few seconds, Geronimo KIA, killed in action, right? And so what I'll always remember is this kind of completely unflappable voice of Bill McRaven, communicating essentially, our guys know what they're doing. They've done this before, even when something goes wrong, even when you're all freaking out in the White House Situation Room because I just told you a helicopter was going down. No worries. Our guys are cool. They know how to deal with this. And then within minutes, they've got bin Laden.
Did you find it odd that The Rock was also in the Situation Room with you?
I've never known how The Rock got this information. Like, we kept this tight. We didn't
because he was a part of SEAL Team 6. Everyone knows it.
It never got out. And then all of a sudden, The Rock announced to the world, I think, bin Laden's death, like, before Obama did. And I was like, where does this guy, what kind of intel does The Rock have? Apparently,
I like a guy who announces big news first.
Ben.
Especially deaths.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. We appreciate it.
All right, take care, guys. Good talking.
This was a story that I saw about 9 days ago. Meadowlark Media jumped into action, and 9 days later, I got Rubik's Cubes here delivered to the office because not since my childhood had I thought about these things, and I thought about them the other day, 9 days ago, as I mentioned. Wanted to talk about it for 9 days, waiting for these Rubik's Cubes to get here so we could all fiddle around with them. You seem to have a dime store generic brand. Yours is not an authentic Rubik's Cube. Yours is an imposter.
This looks like from a carnival, the thing that you get with the claw.
We don't Rubik shame around here. There's plenty of different Rubik's cubes.
But the reason all of this came up is because there was a video of someone finishing a Rubik's Cube in an unfathomably impossible time of like 3 seconds. And I've never gotten more than 2 walls, and I played with this throughout my childhood. But before I get to that Rubik's Cube story, because I do want to get to it, I have to, and I'm sorry I have to do this, but Mike Ryan is unhinged. He's emotional. College baseball, David. I don't think that Miami invented it, but college baseball helped become popularized, and did ESPN as well, through University of Miami baseball a million years ago. College baseball has mattered in this town before we had other sports in this town. And you know that Mike Ryan cares about the University of Miami program, and he is beside himself with fury because the athletic director for the University of Miami, who has usually been just an empty suit almost my entire life of just shuffling papers around and grabbing at money and doing it poorly. Everyone but Sam Jankovic, maybe Paul D. He was a lawyer. He had to be a good AD because they needed legal counsel. They were always getting in trouble, and they were doing a lot of bad things. So he was just a lawyer who named himself AD. But the position in sports usually goes to career bureaucrats who climb their way up a ladder of sports bureaucracy to get to the top of, I'm an athletic director. I'm not interesting, but I'm a power broker, and I'm going to meet with a guy with an orange jacket and talk to him about business. Mike is furious right now. Florida and LSU are playing in the College Baseball World Series. College baseball has a lot of buzz around it. It's fun. LSU's got guys who are throwing 100 miles an hour. LSU is like dominated. NIL, and the University of Miami has fallen behind. They hired Gino DiMare to be their coach. He was just a former player, and now Mike has lost it.
Gino DiMare was hired by Blake James, who had a fundraising background. Paul DiMare was a huge booster and supporter of the program. That made for a very complicated dynamic.
Got his son the job to run the program. The historic program was run by a donor who got his son the job to run the team, and now he's been let go or was let go last year.
He wasn't let go. He stepped down, and I think that there's plenty of ways for
he was let go.
I think he stepped down, and I think that there's plenty of ways that Gino DiMare can still help the Miami program. And I do expect him to still be around the Miami program offering such assistance. Call the Canes Connection. But this is the first real search that Dan Radakovich, the new AD, new-ish, he came over from Clemson.
Who you badly wanted.
I was happy with. Wasn't my first choice. You know my first choice? My first choice was Jim Frivola, just because I like an ass kicker.
Why are you laughing?
Because Mike Ryan has become this. He knows everything about every sport. How can you be so
he's
good?
He's a booster. No, but he's a booster here. He is someone who is in the inside.
But that doesn't mean he knows anything.
No, but it does mean that he knows things.
Yeah, but very clearly my record on the University of Miami speaks for itself. I know plenty.
But you have Inter Miami, you have the Heat, you have the Panthers, you have the Marlins. How can you be a jack of so many trades? No wonder you're losing your mind.
I just know a lot of people. But anywho, this is Dan Radakovich's first search for a major coaching spot now that Gino DiMare stepped down, and he promoted from within. J.D. Ortega, not a sexy name.
Another former player,
presently on the staff. I think if you could point to one of the biggest ails that Miami has is that they haven't been able to develop any pitching at this level.
They stopped using steroids. That's a big thing, too.
Okay.
I mean, he's right about that, though.
But for those that don't know, private institutions in college baseball have an uphill battle in competing against the LSUs of the world. What Wake Forest did was really quite impressive. They got within an out of advancing in the College World Series. What ended up doing them in is they ran up against the highest paid pitcher that was in the transfer portal and the highest paid position player that was out of the portal, ended up having the go-ahead run. So I really was impressed with what Tom Walter did. Tom Walter was a coach of the year.
Is that the new math we're doing in this sport now with statistics? It's not what somebody's on-base percentage was. It's how much did the team pay to the rights to this scored run?
Well, being that Miami is a private institution and they have scholarship limits against like some of the perennial powers that they're going up against, I think it was essential that they got somebody with private school experience. Chris Pollard from Duke was Dan Radakovich's top choice. Tom Walter, the reigning coach of the year, really wanted the job, was in the mix, but unfortunately Miami didn't reciprocate the interest that Tom had. Dan Radakovich struck out, no pun intended, on his top choice. He couldn't convince his top choice to leave Duke, and now he does this very unpopular move of promoting J.D. Ortega.
Unpopular with you.
Unpopular with a lot of folks.
Who are they? Who are a lot of folks?
Well, check Twitter.
Those folks.
People that care deeply
No,
about...
Look, this program has a deep, deep following, and they regard this former pitching coach, as part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Right. And so Dan Radakovich throughout his tenure, and this is one of those things that I've been unimpressed with Dan Radakovich since he got here, but you give these things time. But Radakovich, on several administrative aspects, hasn't impressed me with some of the decisions that he made. His first move out of the gate was hire 4 high-priced lieutenants. His head of fundraising he hired from Air Force. That's actually one of 3 schools that don't have any NIL. Like he hired a fundraiser without any base knowledge about name, image, and likeness. His main move was to ask big donors to help fundraise for a building when the school could directly fund that building. The school can't directly fund NIL. They're not operating in a state that can. It took several months for Radakovich to finally pivot and say, no, donate to NIL. So
why are you laughing, Samson?
Because I'm remembering how to do the Rubik's Cube, and it's making me smile.
I also have gotten a side, but Mike...
If you get one side, you're doing it wrong. I don't want to tell you that. But
Dan, you got one side?
if you get one side, you're doing it
weren't
wrong.
even looking.
You have to do it's algorithms. You have to memorize.
Well, how are you best? What is the best that you have ever done?
Well, I think that you need to do the cross first, if I remember correctly. Like, you need to make sure, because you work around the centerpiece, because the centerpieces don't move. So whatever the center tile is, that's what that side has to be, because you can't move the centerpiece. And then I think, if I remember correctly, you have to do a cross first, and then you work the corners out.
But can you do it? Have you done it successfully?
Well, no. I mean, I watched a YouTube video and I memorized it. So, like, if that counts, then yes. I had this fascination 10 years ago.
So you
maybe,
cheated?
Where I wanted. No, I didn't cheat. I learned. You can't do it
Learning
without
from
knowing
YouTube is not cheating.
the algorithms.
Well, but
Yeah.
I thought you were.
Let me ask you a
following
question.
steps.
If you go to school and someone teaches you information, then when you take the test and you remember the information, did you cheat? No, you learned.
I did.
I thought that you were basically getting a tutorial on YouTube that you were following step by step.
Oh, yeah.
During it.
That's how you learn.
That's how you learn. You memorize the things.
The reason why we're all talking about Rubik's Cubes is someone set the record. We have video of that record being set right now. What's his name? Johnny?
Johnny, apparently, who works here, is good at Rubik's Cube and can solve them all, and did one of them in 18 seconds, which I think is a lie that they were
Doesn't work
just
here.
telling.
I'm very confused by the word.
Well, Johnny's Danny's brother.
Okay, that's not interesting in any way.
not helping.
And, no, he never is. And this person who was on the screen, whose name I do not know, was allowed to watch it and look at the cube for about 10 seconds and then solved it in a just staggering amount of time. Yes, 3.134 seconds.
Look at the reaction.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
The kid was mind blown.
Yes,
Oh my God.
I mean, that is mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing.
That's ridiculous.
You're getting video.
3 seconds. Well, this video is pretty useless coming in at the end after it's already been done. But we have interrupted what is a Mike genuine rage at the athletic director at the University of Miami.
Well, he's just been really unimpressive. I mean, hiring a head of fundraising from a school that doesn't know anything about NIL, Dan Radakovich hasn't displayed a high NIL acumen to me. He's had to be convinced by powerful boosters, like, you're funding the wrong thing. This is how this works. You can fund a building. So for his first search, he really hired somebody that's gone over like a lead balloon. It's been really disappointing. But back to the Rubik's Cubes, we got all thinking about, has anyone actually solved the Rubik's Cube here in the studio? And we've had mixed answers on that. It's hard. It's always been hard. So what we decided is we have 2 people that are very hungry for microphones around here, in Taylor and Mike Fuentes. And we're giving them to the rest of eternity to solve a Rubik's Cube. And if one of them solves it, they get to sit in the shipping container for a show.
I'm not giving them a whole show.
No. They don't have to. We don't even have to give them the microphone, but they can just sit in.
I'm not giving them a whole show. They can sit in for a couple of hours.
All right, fine. A couple of hours, which is basically a whole show. But either way, they're not going to get it because we're giving them to all eternity. So right now, they are sitting on a couch where they'll remain for the next 70 years trying to solve this Rubik's Cube so they can get into this studio.
David, what is the best you have ever done at Rubik's Cube? You were just delighted and interrupted Mike Ryan on what was going to become a diatribe that he's now regretfully pulling back on.
As he should be.
Well, he shouldn't be, because we just almost witnessed the best coup of this hour.
No.
We almost did. Mike Ryan turning on the University of Miami's leadership.
Yeah, I just haven't been impressed with Dan Radakovich.
He turns on everybody.
I'm not turning. I waited a year, and this search to me was an important hire because I love baseball, and I think he really messed it up. And I've bit my tongue on a lot of things that have concerned me about his tenure.
All of the things.
And if he got this right with either his top choice in Chris Pollard or Tom Walter from Wake Forest, who did an amazing job over there and wanted to be here, I would have been happy, and I would have swallowed all the other things and just chalked it up to Dan Radakovich learning the new landscape of college athletics. But this has been not a great experience, and I'm not crazy about him as our AD right now.
There's one that's on the corner that I need to get over one, but I can't, and I don't know how to get it because it's stuck, and I just need it over one side.
Dan Radakovich sounds more like Dan Batakovich.
Oh, that's the wrong one I hit. I meant to hit the Loser Game Show sound.
Look at this.
How do you do Rubik's Cube without your glasses on?
Look at this situation, Tony. I have here, this one the blue one has to be here, and the white one has to be here. It's in the same spot. They're just reversed.
Exactly.
I need to flip
How
it around.
did you do it?
Mike, I'm not spending $1 making you a fan of a team of mine because it is $1 not well spent. You're very, very critical, and it's not thoughtful criticism.
When it comes to the University of Miami, I can guarantee you I'm good to have supporting the program.
Because you're a booster?
Yeah, you say with a question mark. No, I'm a booster, and I help the program quite a bit.
Like a John Ruiz type booster?
I help like a Ruiz.
Mike
Ruiz.
We've got so many Ruizes in South Florida.
It's like Goldberg.
We couldn't even have 6 as a group right now. If we spent the entire segment, we wouldn't get 6 sides total between all of us.
The important question is, who played for the Brewers and the Yankees?
There are a couple of sports things that we have to get to before I get out of here today, which is one of them is Aaron Rodgers and the comedic perfection of as soon as he gets to the Jets saying, you know what, I need hallucinogens, I need to advocate for psychedelics. My reality is something that I'd like to be different. I like my reality, what it was with the Packers, but now I'm going to advocate actively as the quarterback for the Jets before throwing for a pass on behalf of mind-altering drugs. That is comedically perfect if you're a Jets fan, but not as perfect as Kevin Durant showing up in a Twitter space argument, and it's KD is not top 5 is the group where he's just entering to argue basketball with people. And I think people will call him sensitive and say he shouldn't be doing that. I want to advocate on behalf of all athletes doing this, joining the group chats that you have with your friends and just eviscerating people with their genius because they're smarter than you about basketball. But I just love that he's searching the internet for every crevice and darkness where someone's saying something bad about him so he can correct them.
Who would do that? What I like so much about Kevin Durant now, he's actually waited us out on this because it was whack what he was doing before, and I think I know what changed. He stopped doing it with burners. Yeah. He's doing it now just his normal handle, and mad respect for that. Burner thing wasn't cool. Whack. It was whack, but you're doing this on your official channels? Cool. That's funny. I've circled back on the pettiness, and now I'm with it.
Yeah. It is a new role for him because these guys are all aging. The league is being taken by youngsters. Kevin Durant is the old man fighting the internet over how great he is. You can't do better than that on funny where, hey, I tried to do what you guys wanted me to. I was chasing LeBron the whole time. It's hard to chase LeBron. He's pretty good. You know what I did then? I went to a team where basketball would be easy, and then I won a couple of championships. Oh, you didn't want that either. All right, I'm going to just be bitter at the end. I'm going to fight the whole internet because I'm better at basketball than any of you I'm arguing with.
I think it's sad. Kevin Durant's become sad to me. He could have been one of the greatest of all time. Not top 5, but now he's just sort of nothing.
He might be a top 5 scorer for all time already. You could say that.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And unlike other people in that conversation, He's an efficient one.
Well, in that conversation, or just Twitter people?
Usually scorer is code for inefficient scorer, and that you'd like to take a contested
Kevin Durant is one of the purest, best scorers, top 5 in the history of the league. No argument. The argument that he's entering is people saying he's not top 5 of all time. And okay.
Fair enough.
I mean, okay.
All right.
He's 7th. That's too bad. He's going to have to settle.
Could be top 10.
9, okay.
Top 12 even.
No, but why is he doing it? I'm more interested in the why.
Because he's correcting fools one at a time.
But who cares?
Well, he does, clearly.
But why?
What's happening to the game? Whenever I do something, I want to know there's an object. What's the win?
To embarrass others?
Inside a Twitter space?
You're never going to embarrass people on Twitter. Like, you're never going to win them over. You're just going to lose that proposition.
You don't think this could just be fun for him? Like, it's got to be fun to go on and eviscerate people with your basketball knowledge when you're just sitting there taking the hate all the time. Like, I think at this point, instead of viewing it as like, oh, it's so sad, it's like Dan just said, there are these two different versions of Kevin Durant that already existed. One that was chasing LeBron James and one that was, now told by Stugotz, oh, you have no rings because of the Warriors. So he's looking at these different paths and going, nobody thinks I'm great. I'm just going to fool them with, my
You think he sits in his skivvies answering one person at a time? Is that what we're picturing right now?
I mean, just whenever he's bored, he goes on the internet and fights with people. And it's probably been challenging to his mental health over time, and now he doesn't give a bleep anymore. Now he'll go and fight, and whatever becomes of it in terms of content, he's not hiding anymore in the eggs and the burner accounts. He's just saying, okay, I'll go fight you in public, whatever.
But is it what you do when you're on your Twitter?
No,
but you do this when don't say you don't. There's people who have numbers next to their name. And you say, oh, I really care what you think, Johnny 6969-Dan.
Yeah. And big fat white face. Don't forget big fat white face.
Are you in your skivvies doing that because you're bored?
All I'm doing on the internet is fooling around.
But are you in your skivvies, Dan? Stop avoiding the question.
Put it on the poll,
or your
please.
mother's basement.
At LeBatard Show, put it on the poll. Do you call or have you ever heard anyone call underwear skivvies?
Yeah. There's only 2 places on earth that people lodge complaints on social media and the internet. It's either in their skivvies or their mom's basement.
But he thought it was clever. He kept going back to it again and again as if it was clever.
No, not as if it's clever. It's just descriptive.
Does it matter whether he's in basketball shorts or not? He's fiddling around on the internet the way people fiddle around on the internet. Not everyone's in a jacket all the time like you.
I'm not in a jacket all the time. You'll FaceTime me and I'm often shirtless watching content in my skivvies.
Tony, what I wanted to get to was something we didn't get to last week, which was the NBA draft. We didn't talk about it at all. Our coverage was not great on this show, but now you're going to condense top 5. You're going to give us all of the things that we missed, all of the things that were important, the top 5 things from the NBA draft, 4 days old, but these are delightful leftovers. These are the
First show since
Chinese food 4 days later in the fridge, you still want to eat it, right? Pizza.
Absolutely.
David, are you okay? Because now it's getting louder and louder, the way you're coughing, sneezing, hacking, snorting. You've been disruptive. Your timing has been off during the show.
How long is pie good for in the fridge, just as an aside?
What is the best thing to eat after 4 days in the fridge?
Chinese food, for sure. Chinese food.
Because I have key lime pie that I feel like I've probably waited too long, but it's key lime pie, and I love it.
How long is too long, though? I think a couple of weeks, no? 10 days?
That's way too long.
On a pie?
On
Not
a
with
pie, I think
dairy.
a week is good.
Something frozen? Something you can freeze, too, or something?
No, it's not frozen. I had half a slice of the key lime pie, and then I put it in the refrigerator. I should toss it.
Garbage.
Yeah, toss it.
How long you had it?
Well, I'm not even it was gifted to me. It was a secondhand gift. It was given to my parents, and then they gifted it to me. So throw on an extra couple days there.
Do you put things in your fridge in an order? I do that. Of oldest to not of what you need to eat next.
Tony.
How do you do it? Like back to front or left to right?
You see what he's doing,
Tony,
Dan, right?
you
No,
see what
top
he's
to
doing?
bottom.
See what he's doing?
Don't
Mike,
it-
hit the music.
We all see what he's doing.
He's trying to get in the way of Tony. He's not
gonna
a
happen,
supportive
Dano.
teammate. He's
Wow.
not.
I love Tony.
It's the return of Tony's top 5 for Billy, haters, and capitulators everywhere.
Before we get to it, though, just how long has it been, do you think, Billy? Because am I
long
embarrassing
enough.
myself by saying 7 to 10 days you're good on a key lime pie?
I mean, it's still in my fridge, and I eyeball it every day and say I should
It's
probably
a whole pie versus a slice scenario. If you got the whole pie, it's 10 days.
If you
don't
get
have a slice,
something
you gotta
for
throw it away.
Christmas, you're telling me that's got to be out of the fridge by New Year's. By New Year's Eve.
New Year's, no. Holidays are different.
No,
different
but David
timelines.
is saying a pie, get it out of here after a couple of days.
It goes down each shelf, one per day.
Well, so hold on a
Shelves, you
second.
have to throw it
Every
away.
day you reorganize your fridge? You
Yes.
move things down?
Number 5.
Oh, wow, taking control.
You guys hear that? Listen closely for a second. There's some chords and melodies coming together in Utah.
How many shelves do you have?
Shut up, Billy. There's chords and melodies coming together in Utah. Let me
5.
read you the
So day 6, everything's out of there.
starting 5 for the Utah Jazz. Keontae George, Ochai Agjibi, Lauri Markkanen, Taylor Hendricks, Walker Kessler. Guys, let's keep an ear in Utah.
Danny Ainge, is it an ear or an eye?
We're keeping an ear. It's the Jazz. We're keeping an ear on Utah.
Okay, it's not
Not an eye.
Stugotz's eye.
Nope, we're keeping an ear on the Utah Jazz. Just seeing what kind of music's happening over there. I think they're starting to get some
I
together.
think the eye and the ear should be in OKC if we're doing young teams, not Danny Ainge.
Do you remember the New Orleans Jazz? That's why they're the Utah Jazz.
I do not.
Did you know that?
I did.
Okay. Keep going.
Number 4,
Thank you.
Jordan Hawkins
It's like the Lakers.
from UConn. Best shooter in the NBA draft. DMV stand-up.
That is an odd choice for number 4.
Minnesota.
From all the things
Jordan
in the
Hawkins,
NBA
you
draft,
saw him play, right, Dan?
all the things, he's better than Juan Wick. That-
Easily.
Oh no,
No, he's
Easily.
not.
No
No,
one's
he's
better
not.
than Juan
No
Wick.
one is better than Juan
No,
Wick.
no.
Is he a Latin action star? No.
There is a top tier in the NBA, and I believe he fits the mold. I'm seeing Luka. I'm seeing Jokic with Juan Wick. That's because he's extremely slow and plodding.
Yes, the evolution of the sport is towards slower. Jokic is the new copycat. We're going to go loaf of bread slow.
Yeah, but that loaf of bread is 7'1". This loaf of bread is 6'6".
Yeah, but
That's still pretty big at the
Yes.
position, though.
At what position?
Jokic does not have a
PG.
cool name like Juan Wick.
That's also true. Number 3, Spurs. Get over yourselves. We knew where you were going. You didn't have to take all 5 minutes. I'm waiting for one time for an NBA team, an NFL team, an MLB team, somebody to have 1 second run off the clock, and that person sprinting up. Here it is. Here's our Wembanyama.
The Spurs played it out. They
5
did that.
minutes. Come on. We got things to do. The whole first round, by the way, 3.5 hours. What are we doing?
Can you pass me the ball just briefly? I know it's your top 5. I see a lot of people tripping over themselves now to come over to the, Wemby's not that good side of the street. Stay over there. We don't want you. We called this. You saw that workout video?
I saw a lot of misses.
Yeah, I didn't see a make. The one make was out of frame.
You, though, are the critic hater's delight in that you are taking this from 2 angles. One, can the 7'5" guy dribble like a 6'4" guy?
He can't. Turnover prone.
He's 7'4".
And, well, he'll be 7'5" by the time we're done with talking about this because he's still growing.
Turnover prone.
But then the other bet you're making, and you're going to take a victory lap on this one that's unseemly, is when he gets hurt because people like this always have foot problems.
Yes.
Yes. You're going to
That's
take
what
a
I'm doing.
victory lap.
That's what I'm doing. It's an informed opinion.
It's
Instead of just
so
saying
bad.
greatest, most NBA ready prospect of all time, let's look at the frame and let's look at the body of work. I'm not here to project. That's San Antonio's job. But right now, this player can't shoot. Very thin knees. They're probably going to buckle under one back down.
Okay, does Wemby
And there's
have
an
thin
Achilles
knees?
tear waiting to happen.
Now do you see that he knows everything
Does-
about
does-
everything?
He does have thin knees.
Does
It's true.
Win-
I got one word. Well, is it one word? It might be 2. Either way, plantar fascia.
Number 2.
Number 2, speaking about NBA ready guys, I'm pushing all of my chips to the middle of the table on one guy in this NBA draft. His name is Scoot Henderson. I think he's going to be the best player out of this draft. Portland's not going to have Dame for much longer. He's going to be able to take that mantle for one of the best players in the league. I think Scoot Henderson's a really good guy.
The Thompson
Good guy.
twins went into the gap. You don't
They
see
did.
that too often.
They did, and God help
A
them.
good
Houston,
guy is your analysis. You're analyzing. You're doing
Well-
a top 5, and Scoot is a good guy is what you're doing with number 2. Number
Yeah,
1.
Number 1, way too much in the NBA draft.
Grady did get
Not only Grady Dick, Dan, I've got something else. Play it.
But I tell you, I like from Kansas.
Fat Joe. I mean, what are we doing here?
What do you mean? What is he doing?
You got to go full name there.
Do you?
Yeah, I
It's
think so.
it's a guy's name.
it gets confusing.
Grow up.
That's
Oh.
right.
Gets confusing. You
That's
never know.
right. Grow up.
Oh, grow up, please.
Fat Joe, is that beard painted on?
Yes.
That's paint.
Yes.
I mean, who's to say?
Is it tattooed or painted?